Greetings and Happy New Year. Today is New Year's Eve, 2022, 2023, and it's a good year to kind of put behind us. It was a very interesting vintage. Of course, those wines are all laying in the barrel now, but we look forward to a 23 that is more normal, let's say. But anyway, we have a very beautiful selection of our wine club for this go around. This is the third shipment of the season, and this will go out just the beginning of January. Susan and I are getting ready to head off to Europe for the first time here in a couple of years. So we look forward to seeing a lot of friends and tasting a lot of things that we've had bottles shipped over. So that'll be interesting and putting some stuff in the bottle. So anyway, what we have for you is I have two wines, reds that are super beautiful. One is very elegant, very classic, but from the New World. And then we have one of the most stunning Cabernet Francs I've had in my life. And we're going to talk a little bit about styles and that, pretty different than what we do here. And then to finish up with our very first Gamay Rosé, which is the Rose of Burg, but made from Gamay, whereas in the past it was Grenache. So without further ado, in wine, people talk about good vintage and bad vintage, and you really don't have, but rarely, a bad vintage anymore. We have really extreme weather conditions and that don't allow you to bring in ripe and healthy fruit. What you have really is vintages that play into different styles, and that's oftentimes what winemakers are kind of saying, almost like in code, that there are wineries that really their style lends itself towards very ripe, very, very kind of soft, we'd say hedonistic style wines. And then there's the older style, which we kind of fall into, which are wines that are architecturally very different. Wine has shape, and these are wines that are typically picked, we'd say, at a normal level of ripeness. Today they'd be considered a lower level of ripeness, with more acidity, more pronounced kind of fruit flavors and that. But the ability for wines to age and develop, and really wines that are not geared towards sipping so much on their own as they are really for being at the table with food and really highlighting food and vice versa. So we've got a beautiful, beautiful Cabernet Franc, fits that style. And then, like I said, we'll finish up with the Gamay. 18 Pinot Noir is a vintage that plays into the style that we like. When we first came here from California, California is very much known for this very ripe style. And I mentioned architecture just a minute ago. Architecture in wine, I oftentimes use waterscapes as an example, that the architecture of a lot of modern wines are this kind of almost like 12-inch deep water on 100 acres, where you see it and it's so big in that, but there's really not a lot of depth to it, versus water going through a gorge where from a distance it doesn't look like the water is even moving that, and you get up close and you can see not only is it moving, but there's massive amounts of water moving underneath it. That's the style of wine I find much more interesting, age-worthy, and those are the wines classically that made areas like Bordeaux and Burgundy famous. And winemaking has a lot to do with that, where you source your fruit from, but especially when you picking a little bit earlier, using a little bit more what we could say reductive winemaking, which is less oxygen, tends to lead towards that second style that we want to do. 18 really played into that. 18 was a fairly moderate vintage in terms of weather. Had beautiful acidity in the wine, and I began picking a number of years ago, beginning about 2015, picking a little bit earlier, kind of seeing if I could kind of cinch up those walls and add that depth to it. And I think 18 hit that. 3 years in barrel, which is really unheard of, as we know. There's a handful of wineries that will do 2. Almost everybody else is 10 months or less. A lot of modern wines, Pinot Noir, don't even go to barrel. But anyway, this is a wine's 3 years in barrel, and is maybe the most age-worthy wine for Pinot Noir that I've made so far. This along with the 2017 50th anniversary. So let's take her for a spin. Right off the bat, I get this really kind of sweet, beautiful kind of red fruit to the wine, and this crushed undergrowth, almost like the forest floor, the litter. It's what the French call sous-bois. And sous-bois is turning a log over the forest, and we smell that sweet kind of composting smell that you get in Pacific Northwest coastal forests. This has that smell. And then a little hint of spice. There's a particular barrel that I use on this that gives you almost like a spice character, like a sweet spice, and I lay that into a little bit of wood that's a little bit more kind of smoky. But all those smells of those, oftentimes when you smell wines, it's like layers. You smell it, and you get one thing, one thing, one thing. Sometimes it's more like a bouquet. You kind of put it out there. You can kind of pick up 3 or 4 things, and I do that with this wine. So. As the wine enters my palate, I get weight to it. Part of dry farming is giving you that concentration, that what's called dry extract in Europe. Get that weight. Kind of fans out a little bit, but then very kind of big. And as I mentioned, that water going through a gorge, I can still feel the wine kind of falling and growing down a little bit. As it finishes up, the acidity and the beautiful wood character, the structure, and it's from that one particular barrel. Again, this wine has about 25% new wood, so not a lot of new wood, but I feel that kind of structure picking up on the back end. Still very tight. I use that analogy of rosebuds. This is like a rosebud that's like a third kind of cocked open. So this wine has a super, super beautiful future, and I look forward to drinking this 5-10 years from now. This is a wine, it's interesting to taste now, but it's a wine that really kind of calls for checking back in like 3 to 5 years for it. So anyway, it's a great signpost to where we're headed. Second wine, which is our international selection, is a Cabernet Franc from the Loire Valley, which we've entertained a few of those before. And many of you, I know from your comments that when you come in here into the tasting room and things that you write us and that, Cabernet Franc is a favorite. And for me as well, Cabernet Franc is the elegant version of Cabernet Sauvignon. And for so long, and I love Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet kind of shows you what it is. Cabernet Franc is something you have to get to know a little bit. And it's kind of a winemaker's wine, I'd say. There's just, for whatever reason, there aren't that many people produce it, but it's really one of the stunning grapes, I think, of Umpqua Valley in particular. But there are 2 styles. You have the Bordeaux style that kind of falls in line with Cabernet Sauvignon, where it's more structured, deeper, more powerful. Oftentimes, that's a style that we'll get here. And then there's a very different style. There's a style that's almost Pinot-esque that you see. The home of that style would be the Loire Valley. So south of Paris a little bit, and then all the way west onto the Atlantic coast, you have the Loire Valley. And the most famous red wine out of the Loire Valley is Chinon or Bourgil, which are Cabernet Francs. And those tend to be that more elegant style. I had this wine at a tasting here a couple months back, and this wine absolutely blew me away. It is a wine that has utmost finesse and elegance and layers of perfume, but it's so gentle in terms of its presentation that it's a very, very different side of Cabernet Franc. And I think this time of year we tend to eat kind of more medium-bodied foods, but a lot of earthier. We start using a lot of mushrooms and this kind of thing, a lot of beef stock in this, so the foods are a little bit richer. This style of wine, along with the Pinot Noir 18, those are super beautiful styles of wine. You don't always have to have big when it's cold, bigger reds than that. These are wines that not only pair nicely with the food and really accentuate the food because of their acidity, but they're wines that are genteel. They're very kind of elegant to drink, and they're never overwhelming, which is magic. So this is also an interesting wine because this is not aged in barrel. This is aged in cuve, which is concrete. So if you go back prior to 1950, there were 3 wine regions of Europe that used small barrel. Everybody else would use these larger cask or cement tanks and that for aging. And this wine's 15 months in cement. And so cement allows it to breathe, but doesn't give you any wood flavor. So it's really kind of a framing of what the natural elements are within that fruit itself. A lot of this is off of slate vineyards, a little bit of limestone. So those are things, once again, that help build elegance and perfume because of the rocky type soil. So the heavier the soils, the heavier, the bigger the wine, the lighter the texture, sand, gravel, slate, typically the more perfumey, a little bit more transparent, but more nuanced the wines are. So. Very almost like a red cherry fruit, very kind of bright, sweet, but not sticky sweet. A little bit of a tang to it that's beautiful. Just super nice. I mean, the wine just reveals everything. Doesn't come out too powerful, but it really kind of shows itself. So a little bit more volume. The acid's really, really stunning. A little bit of almost like a bay leaf. There's a little bit of a balsam character in this that probably comes from the wood as well as from Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc sometimes can have a little bit of like a green edge to it element that is one of the complexing agents. As the wine ages, and it's something that comes from the grape itself, as the wine ages, sometimes that turns into almost like a little bit of a tobacco leaf. When they're really, really complex smells, you get in tobacco leaves, which are fermented, so you see the same kind of characteristics sometimes you see in wine. But still very, very persistent in a lot of fruit. Usually fruit's the first thing to fall out. I still get this beautiful kind of bright acidity and cherry. A little bit of an edge, killer with food. Wines like this, you think about, I oftentimes talk about Italian reds, how Italian reds are hard to drink by themselves. You don't sit around and drink Chianti at the table, but with food, it's just you can't keep your hand off the glass. And so this is a wine kind of walks down that path of very, very classic, and really both of these wines do. And there's the term of terroir, which is reflection of place, and part of that is the soil and the climate and that, but a big part of that is the human element of who's steering that by taste. And so I see, my reflection a little bit in both of those in terms of what I like. So to finish up with our first rosé in a while, Gamay. We took over a vineyard that had Gamay, and I love Gamay, and we're going to come out later this year. You'll be able to taste our Gamay that we produced, red Gamay, which is stunning. Gamay is one of the hot grapes in Oregon right now. It used to be a lot of it, not so much today. But anyway, I took one of the tanks that we had, and I picked a little bit early some Gamay. So I bled that off and did a little bit of rosé, which is what this is. And so this is a style Gamay, and I had no idea. I've tasted a few French Gamay rosés, but this is much more kind of full-bodied character than I would think, and that's not so much alcohol, but it tends to be kind of it's denser, richer. It's more, we'd say, Venice-like. It's more wine-like instead of kind of easy quaffing, but beautiful for sitting out in the patio in the summer or this time of year. You're cooking dinner to have a nice, beautiful little glass of rosé. Stunning color to me. Rosé's part of the beauty is the color, and this has a beautiful kind of pinky red, but a little bit of like a classic descriptor for some of the Loire Valley and southeastern French rosés is like an onion skin. This has like a little bit of that kind of character, but two things. I get a little bit of like a spicy red fruit, and then I get a little bit of like a green apple. That green apple comes from the malic acid, and I smell that, and that's very, once again, the wines that I tend to like come out of the glass, and you don't have to go looking for that smell, but the thing is you salivate in anticipation of tasting it, and this has that.